Good day. Recently, President Donald Trump had a phone call with Russian President Putin. That phone call was anticipated for a long time, and eventually it happened. And the outcome of it was that Donald Trump did not get what he really wanted. From that meeting, Donald Trump signals that he has finally come to that point where he's making a desperate decision about the Ukraine-Russian war. That decision is for America to leave. Since coming into office, even before coming into office, President Donald Trump promised that he will end the Ukraine war in a day. But that hasn't happened. That's far from happening. There are intricacies in that Ukraine war that are so complex that he has come to find out that it is not as he thought it would be. Now, as it stands, the Ukraine war has become an albatross on the neck of the American state. In fact, recently, during a meeting with the Senate Foreign Services Committee, the Foreign Secretary, Marco Rubio, stated clearly that the Ukraine war is distracting America from other important issues. But I dare say that it is not just the fact that it is distracting America from other issues that is at stake here. The Ukraine war has become a big cancer to the American Treasury. It is sucking the blood out of American government. Military weapons are being sent to to Ukraine, and it is also a big financial drain on Ukraine. Pardon me. It is also a big financial drain on the American military spending. America has a lot of geopolitical interests now, other than the one that was had by the previous regime. President Trump has said repeatedly that the Ukraine war is not his war, it is Biden's war. I agree completely with him. In fact, I go further to say that the Biden administration was a two-agenda administration: fight Putin and fight Donald Trump. The Biden administration was so laser focused and went so deep into so much that was so out of reason that it did everything in encouraging and starting this war in Ukraine. That is my own personal opinion. I'll delve into that in other videos eventually. But now this war is the responsibility of, of Trump to continue or to stop. And as he said after that phone call with Putin, he said it's a mess. In a press conference, he said repeatedly that this is not my war. This is Biden's war. We agree that it is Biden's war, but it is up to him to stop it. But it is not as clear-cut and as easy as it seems. And hold historical relationships between Russia and Ukraine, and also between Russia and the Europeans, particularly Germany and France, have led that this war to spew into a big cesspool of hatred and geopolitical relevance now, because in moving the war forward, Russia has gained so much from this war that it's amazing. In trying to sanction Russia from getting access to finance from its oil exports, they have great resilience in the Russian economy that nobody anticipated. The Russian economy has grown to the point where Russia is now the fourth largest by way of both GDP and purchasing power parity. But if there was any surprise about this war, it is the resilience of the manufacturing capacity of the Russians and their ability to innovate by way of military innovations. The warfare in Ukraine has changed completely. It is now, we see drones, we hear of Iskander missiles, we hear of missile systems, we hear of the Oreshnik missile systems, we hear of missile systems that were not thought of to be in the arsenal of the Russians. The Russians have shown particularly that they are a very resilient, hardy group. They've absorbed all that has been thrown at them, and they are surviving, and at this point, they are winning on the battleground. Haven't taken substantial parts of Ukraine, the Zaporizhia region, the Donbass, and Kherson, and also they are very close to taking the parts of getting to the Dnipro River. So the war, as Donald Trump has said and admitted, is a mess. It's a mess because America has other geopolitical priorities. Particularly, America wants to project strength and put maximum pressure on Iran to stop its nuclear program. But even more importantly, America wants to pivot to the South China to the South China Sea. It wants to pivot to the Indo-Pacific and roll out an extensive military presence there in an attempt to contain China. And for America, this policy, this is the premier policy of the Trump administration: contain China militarily. China itself has grown by strength in its military, and recently the success of its military arsenal and hardware in Pakistan has shown that its military build-up and its investment and innovations in military is something to be looked at seriously by the West. So if you ask me, the Chinese are particularly looking at the efforts of Donald Trump to end the war, and they will be smiling and laughing. Trump said that this war is, the way he called it, is entanglement, that they should never have, America should never have been part of this war in Ukraine. The historical basis for the war, the drivers of the war were primarily Russia's concern. Russia was concerned that through Ukraine, Napoleon invaded. Through Ukraine, Hitler invaded Russia. And if Ukraine joins NATO, NATO will be preparing to also one day invade Russia. Russia viewed Ukraine as an existential threat. That has been their primary statement regarding this war, that Ukraine should be neutral and Ukraine should be demilitarized and Ukraine should act as a buffer zone between Russia and Europe. But Ukraine is trying to exercise its right. Zelensky insists that they do have a right to choose their partners. But as it said, when elephants fight, it's the grass that really suffers. In this case here now, the West was insistent that they needed to be close to Russia, and Russia was insistent that it's a security threat to them. Now we have this situation where the American president had promised much but cannot do anything. The Europeans, under the framework of the European Commission, led by Ursula von der Leyen and Macron, the French president, and Starmer, particularly, very hawkish against Russia, and the new German president, Merz, they are very insistent that this war should continue. Russia should be sanctioned, and NATO and Ukraine has a right to choose its friends. But this geopolitics isn't like that. The world still is a place for the strong. And in this particular case, Russia has projected strength and shown that it is very strong. Indeed, this war is now a big entanglement of the Americans. Try as he can to extricate America out of this war. Trump will be accused. He knows that he will be accused of throwing the war and throwing Ukraine under the bus if he withdraws American support. American support should never be understated. American support, particularly its intelligence support, where it has satellite systems that can overlook the whole terrain of the war, where it shares intelligence with Ukraine, where it gives it hardware, where it supports its ability to even shoot that hardware into targets across the front line and even into Russia. The American support is extensive. The American support is also one that is keeping up the Ukrainian economy, because as much as the Ukrainians have been fighting, they've been depleted and their economy is in a mess. But through American support, salaries are being paid, pensions are being paid, and it is this support that ran up those bills, those huge 250 of $300 billion bills that Trump is so angry about, and accuses the Biden administration of irresponsibility in spending this much. $300 billion is a lot of the American taxpayers, but the historical reasons and the motive for Biden to encourage Ukraine to go into war is one that should be assessed later on in history. Make no mistake, without Biden and without the support, without the prompting of leaders like Boris Johnson, this war will not have happened because the Ukrainians may not have that will, that strength, that belief that the West is behind them and they can. And it really is a sad situation. The Ukrainians are being decimated on the war, on the battlefield, but beyond that, their demographics are really shifting and changing. A lot of Ukrainians are leaving the country. It's a terrible mess for Ukraine. Much as I spoke recently to someone who visited Kiev, and they said, yes, there's a lot of development going on in Kiev there. But the intricate harm to Ukraine is that now most of its doctors, its nurses, its professional class are now in the cities of Europe. They are part of also the healthcare systems of America. Ukraine is losing its best, just like most countries in conflict. It's losing its best and they're building up a large diaspora abroad. Now, will that be good to Ukraine in the future? Only time will tell. We see the influence of the Somali diaspora, the Iranian diaspora, the Armenian diaspora. But we don't know what the Ukrainian diaspora will do in the future. But we do know that the Ukrainian diaspora is quite influential in America. Not this modern diaspora. The Ukrainian diaspora is the diaspora that came after the World War from fleeing away from the Ukrainian. The Ukrainians that supported the Nazis and who have had historical hatred of the Russians. They formed a big community in America that has kept America in a Russophobic flex, where a lot of the policy agendas of America tend to be against Russia, despite all the attempts over the past 30 years of Putin to to get close to the West. So this entanglement is not going to be easy for Donald Trump to extricate himself from. And the longer it lasts and the more it extends, it bemuses the Chinese. They are ready, they are prepared as they watch America trying to extricate itself from a big geopolitical mess it's found itself in so that it can pivot back and concentrate and train all its military might against them. Xi Jinping has stated repeatedly that while now he's moderate, he's not talking much about it's overt support for the Russians. It gives them political and diplomatic support, no doubt, in the United Nations and every other geopolitical sphere. But for now, there has been no overt military support to the Russians, as was done by the North Koreans recently when they helped the Russians in the operations in Kursk. So it is very clear now that Donald Trump is desperate. He needs to we hear of possibly a war with Iran and possibly a war with China, if not even a war, a demonstration of military strength with China to contain its growing influence, especially now that some people feel that you should contain China long before it becomes a threat to America. For as we watch this desperation, Marco Rubio very desperately in the Senate chamber there was saying that America has other priorities that Ukraine is distracting them from. And it is very possibly not possible that forgive my English. It is possible that this Ukraine Russia war is a bonus to China, not because they are supporting Russia deliberately, but because it keeps America entangled. And they have an interest in seeing that this thing continues. As at now, the Russians can contain it. They are containing it in a slow burner. But we hear that the Russians may be on a serious offensive at a time that Europe is depleted, at a time that they can't do any other thing. The only offensive action they have against the Russians is another round of sanctions. Those sanctions haven't worked in 3 years, in 10 years, and they won't work again in 6 months, in 10 months going forward. The Russians have found workarounds for their economy, for their currency, for their trade, and even for their diplomacy. They have found so much, they found new friends, and what this war has shown is that there is now the influence of the West as a power has waned desperately. America is now very desperate. Donald Trump is desperate. The phone call with Putin was revelatory to him because even before making that call with Putin, after a while after making that call with Putin, he called the European leaders, including the head of the EU, the head of France, and the head of Germany. And when he heard what they said and how they said it, he was left stunned. And he said, "This is a mess. So much hatred, so much hatred." And that was the one I took out of it. The drivers of this war is hatred, historical hatred. Let's not forget that it's the hatred among Europeans that led to World War One and World War Two, and is threatening to lead to World War Three. The Europeans have been at each other's throat since the dawn of time. It is one entanglement that both built America because their support for war in World War One and in World War Two was very critical in the growth of America and the growth of America into a global hegemon. But now, this war going on started by the Europeans, going on in Europe now, is threatening to be a big albatross that may one day sink America. China is looking at this very, very critically, and China is saying, hoping that it will just keep the Americans engaged so that the Americans don't have time to train all their resources against them. And that's the way I view it. China is smiling while America is worrying. Thank you for being part of today's video. My subscriber base has increased and the viewership is also increasing. I know people out there are watching, and just like how every other product, my delivery will continue to improve as I continue to make these videos. If you have comments, share them. If you have other viewpoints, share them. Subscribe, like, and share. Thanks for being with me to this point of the video. I look forward to seeing you so that we'll discuss the next geopolitical issue out there. Thank you.